Now we're in a different place, and there's some leaders in the field who are trying to pull toward that professionalization end, but a lot of teachers who don't want to go there still. So that's creating fractures within the teachers themselves, the teacher groups themselves. So there's a lot about that. It's going to take a huge village, I think, of researchers to start to pick this apart by its elements, and there's a lot of them. And so I had to keep pulling myself back to just answer this question, because it's easy to get. And I think that's true for most topics. But this is a system on the brink of change, I think. We hope. It feels like it's somewhere between that old history and where it's going to go. It's at that tipping point, and it's an uncomfortable place to be. And I think it remains to be seen how that goes. But yeah, thank you. That's great. Oh, wait, you have to say it in there, or they can't hear you in Wichita. We need them to hear you in Wichita.
Hi, Joan. Your research question came out of the fact that there's not any other research that access the voices of these teachers. So did you have a hard time with, once you found what you found, making connections to other research studies or things that might not exist?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple, but really only a couple of other studies, and one of them was pretty old. So yeah, it was hard to connect it. It was somewhat easier to connect it to adult learning theory when I really started to plumb those steps. There were places where adult basic ed learners especially were attended to in the adult learning theory that I could pull back in. But in terms of, yeah, actual older studies, that was rough because there wasn't. There wasn't, yeah.
This is more of a comment, but it seems, excuse me, that the fact that there weren't a lot of other studies speaks to one of the points somebody made about them being marginalized teachers and marginalized learners. Nobody has really, and why there's so many systems problems, because, okay, we do well to, focus on K to 12, and we keep reforming that over and over to some benefit or not. And we look at higher ed, but we don't look at the kids who fall out of the system at some point and then try to come back. So.
Right. And I would comment back to your comment that a couple of the teachers took me to a place with that I would never have gone myself, and I think it's because of their time in the field. And they said, I've heard people say outright, my students say, that people in the community, in society, don't feel like they should have a second chance at public education. They had their chance to go to school, and they didn't do it, or they screwed it up, or whatever it was. And so there's this societal pushback on the adult basic ed student that was invisible to me. But the teachers were aware of it, and they knew it. And that's where the beginning of this sort of who's marginalized and what does that look like when that happens started to really step out. There are a couple of scholars in adult ed who are tackling some of those issues around the field. And again, I would see that as something that really needs to be looked at much more in depth too, because it drives a lot of all of these other. I'm pointing to you like you represent the, but all of those other structural problems. This is a foundation for that. And if it's invisible and we don't know about it, then we won't act on it, or we'll keep acting in ways that perpetuate it without knowing it. Yeah, very complex.
The term adult basic education is a bit of a term of art, and I'm sure it has some fairly clear boundaries to those who are in it. I wonder if there is more research possibly on the history of GED instruction and whether or not any of that might inform this. Also, if there's any research on the teaching of either adult literacy per se, as adult literacy, especially to speakers of other languages than English who may not have been educated in their home language. And so if the adult second language literature might also have something to offer. And I even wonder, going back to the settlement houses of the late 19th century, if there weren't at least some some pieces represented in that progressive era that talked about the needs that still haven't been met, and I almost imagine a Jonathan Colesel-like book that exposes this problem to the general public.
There were a couple of things that you said that I probably should have noted that I most explicitly did not address English language learners in this study. In fact, I asked to speak to work with teachers who only worked with native English speakers, because the topic of adult learning disabilities in the English language learner population has become its own field really by necessity, because what's happened up till now is that the assessments, there are no culturally competent assessments to use to discern whether what a teacher is seeing is a disability, is it a cultural issue, what is that? So that's extremely complicated, but it's also its own field, and I don't have any expertise with that, so I purposely kept that out of the study. The other thing you mentioned, too, is about the adult literacy, and in relation to adult basic ed, and it's funny because Gail Sinise, my other committee member, who's the state director of adult ed in Maine now, is talking a lot about, you know, we're looking at adult basic ed as, does it continue to have to be just reading and math? Is it always going to be reading and math? What about having another newer model of job preparation that isn't necessarily the community college or the vocational school, but is there a way that adult basic ed can also take on a piece of job development for folks? And so there's a way that even that is moving too. But I think all the other things, that the GED and the other things you listed would be places to try to, again, make more connections with something like this.
Something else that occurred to me is that Obama's interest in having 60% of the workforce engage in post-secondary education, it would seem that this population would have to be well served in order for that goal to have a chance of being met.
Absolutely. Have him call me, because I would love to chat about exactly that. Those emails flooding in from around the world, are they?
I just would really like to say that it's wonderful to kick off our soon-to-be graduates, and you're leading the pack with this really important research. And from where I sit, I think it's wonderful, especially because you are bridging fields that probably people hadn't really considered bridging before. And so for so many of our students, this is the case. They're coming in, they're getting doctorates with a focus in adult learning and development, but they're coming from these other places and now, you know, crossing boundaries. And I think that this work is really important and is a great example for our students about how to do that boundary crossing work. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. This is going to be the unanswerable question. That's how this works. I get this now.
So from Rita Jarvis, what do the teachers you interviewed perceive as their purpose in educating their students? Is it simply job preparation, or do they view their role as an agent of social change, giving their students that second chance that they feel that didn't get by society?
That's a great question, and all of the options that she offered were exactly what people said. Their perceptions ranged from, I'm teaching academics, that's what I do. I go in and I teach the reading and I teach the math, that's what I do. All the way, and I guess I see it sort of as a spectrum, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is, you know, I meet with a student and I find out what their goals are, where it is they'd like to be, and then we arrange, you know, what their learning plan is going to be around that. So there was quite a spread. And if I had to, this is just off the top of my head, if I had to place it anywhere, more of the newer and younger teachers were at the end of, I teach academics. I think at least the folks I talked to, they needed that job to have something to hold on to. They needed it to be that level of concrete. The more experienced teachers, and I know there's a whole body of research around how you get expertise in something, which, again, would have taken me off on another, I didn't go there. But I think the more experienced teachers were able to speak in those broader terms like, yeah, I'm teaching academics, but I need to do it in the way that meets where this person's at and where they want to go with it. So there was quite a range, and she hit it right on the head, exactly what that was. Thank you very much. Last check in the checkbox. Thank you very much.